This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Branding Isolate. Are you thinking about starting your new CBD business? Do you need new branding or a website? If you said yes, then Branding Isolate has a solution for you. The team is comprised of professional designers and developers who know how to make your brand stand out from the crowd. Branding Isolate provides a wide variety of services, which include logo design, branding strategy, package design, product photography, website design, and website development. Call them at 832-379-8978 or go to their website at brandingisolate.com. Again, their number is 832-379-8978 or go to their website at brandingisolate.com. Branding Isolate. They handcraft brands that sell, connect, and succeed. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Shayda Torabi, co-founder and CEO at Restart Cbd. Shayda Torabi, how are you, girl?
I'm doing so well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm ready to kick it into high gear. I mean, the holidays have passed, the new year is here, and 2021 is the year of cannabis, I'm feeling. So I'm excited. And I know that you are too, being an OG in the industry here in Texas. So really excited to talk with you today, Shayda.
Me too. I think you hit the nail on the head, especially what we saw happening in 2020, both in Texas, as I know you're also in Texas, but also at a federal level with cannabis. There were some major wins across the board, different states turning, medicinal programs on, transitioning into rec programs. I know Texas, we're still waiting for, I'm going to say it, a proper medicinal program, but our hemp market is very alive and well. And yeah, I'm just really hopeful and excited for what 2021 will bring.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so for those listening, as I mentioned, I have Shayda Torabi on. She's the co-founder and CEO at Restart Cbd. It's an education first CBD wellness brand that takes the stigma out of using CBD by creating a comprehensive line of products that really help educate consumers as to really what the medicinal benefits are for CBD. In addition, Shayda, again, I mentioned you're an OG in the Texas hemp space because you have your own podcast also, To Be Blunt. And I know that you've been an advocate and a user for years. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about those kind of different lenses that you have within the cannabis space.
Yeah, me too. I think, being a cannabis consumer for the past 15 years of my life, I always joke and share, this kind of perspective. Super into the culture of cannabis. I mean, if there is a movie, if there is like a strain, if there is like a dope dispensary in a legal state that I need to go check out, like I've done those things. I've watched those videos. I've seen those memes. But really the CBD conversation and really getting into these minor cannabinoids, discussing the endocannabinoid system. I mean, that was all super foreign to me. And for me, the transition happened about 6 years ago. I was in a car accident where I was hit by a vehicle as a pedestrian, fractured my pelvis in 2 places. And because I've had this history of cannabis consumption, I'm very fortunate. I come from a very open-minded family. My family was very aware of my cannabis consumption. And my mom actually introduced me to what we all now know as CBD oil. But, 6 years ago, you looked around and for one, it wasn't federally legal. I always like to say it wasn't illegal. There just weren't laws around it.
Sure.
Obviously creating an industry around it, regulating it, licensing, things like that. And so then even at a state level, it was just something. I remember my mom bringing CBD up to me and I Googled it. I saw that it was in marijuana. And I was like, oh, I'm good. I'm already, I'm getting CBD. I'm Gucci. Like, who needs to take CBD oil? And obviously now the market has just kind of exploded. So yeah, that was a short-winded version of, I'm just really passionate about this plant. And I do come from the culture side of it, of just being a consumer, but really having this personal injury and that journey through pain management and recovery is really what opened my eyes to learning and understanding about all these other cannabinoids, which is what really led to us founding Restart Cbd. So we founded Restart in August of 2018. So again, it was at that point, just federally legal, because June 2018 is when the hemp bill passed. And then Texas didn't pass until, I believe, or it was October. And then I believe Texas was in June the following year. So there was a little bit of gray area. We were kind of dancing around. Definitely not. I mean, you're in Texas, so you see how popular CBD, especially from a market perspective. I feel like there's a CBD shop on every corner. When
Yeah.
I launched there, it was kind of crickets. We were like, okay, we're going to start this business. We're going to start this brand. Who's going to shop with us? What questions are they going to have? And so I think for me too, as a marketer, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I mean, when you're talking about something that is borderline legal, but also borderline medicine, there's very murky, words that you can't be saying. You can't make medical claims. How do you even educate someone on something if they don't even know what the hell it is to begin with? And so
Right.
we kind of got on that journey of, we love cannabis and we've had value with CBD as a family, but oh shit, how do you go to market and tell this narrative? And so, yeah, we've been really blessed to be one of Austin's top cannabis brands, one of Texas's top cannabis brands. Really, really helping educate consumers is our sweet spot.
Yeah, it's so important, the education factor. And your background is very unique in that, like, you had your parents, your mom specifically, kind of introducing you to the minor cannabinoids, CBD, right? And it's kind of backwards, because it seems like nowadays you've got the younger generation who has experience with these newer strains, the new potency levels of THC and whatnot. And now that CBD is entering the market, it's almost like an education opportunity for the younger generation to do that for their parents and their grandparents, right? So that's really cool that your mom was kind of out of the curve in that way. And so, like, did she always use CBD? She always understood the value of it, or was it something that she kind of learned after that terrible accident that you had?
She learned after the accident. I would say my mother is very into, home remedies. I remember going and seeing kind of, a little bit like a woo-woo doctor, and we were taking different, herbal pills to help with thyroid and digestion and getting different readings done. I mean, she still took me to the doctor. We weren't like that far off that we were afraid of medicine. It was just, my parents were always really open-minded to plants and to kind of learning how you can understand your body best and give your body what it needs. My mother is not a cannabis consumer in any regards. She's just, again, a very open-minded person who, to contrast with myself, I don't consume a lot of alcohol, and I really like to fight the stigma that, like, cannabis and marijuana in particular is a gateway drug. I don't consume really anything else. I love cannabis. And to me, it's a plant. It's a plant with a lot of properties, obviously, depending on ratios now, understanding different cannabinoid, ratios, understanding different doses, different applications, consumption methods, bioavailability of smokable versus an edible versus an ingestible. It all helps you better understand the plant in relationship to your own body. And so that's the setup that my mom provided for me. It was, hey, my daughter is over here loving, marijuana, loving this plant. But again, kind of with that filter of, I always kind of like to highlight and remind people, just because marijuana is legal, if you go into these dispensaries, I still argue and struggle sometimes having the conversation to the extent that we have the conversation from a hemp industry. Hemp customers, they want to know, where's the COA, the certificate of analysis? What is the percentage of CBD? What is the percentage of THC? They're very cautious. Man, when I'm in a Colorado and I go to a dispensary, I want the stuff that smells good. I want the stuff that's going to make me feel good. I'm not asking for any of these things that we've been taught to be educated on. Marijuana consumers aren't really playing that game. So it was,
Right. It's more of that bro science, right? Yeah.
yes. Like, you just kind of like indica sativa hybrid, argue all you want. Those are really small ways of categorizing cannabis. And as a marketer, it's very apparent it's marketing, and
Right.
then you look around, why do we use these words? Why do we say these words? Well, on one hand, it does help, the end consumer better classify the experience they're looking for. But as an industry, I think it really shoots us in the foot because it's just such a dynamic plant. And when you really get into the different cannabinoids, again, I mean, here in Texas, Delta 8 is massively huge. You've got CBG that's pretty big at a national level, CBN. again, when I'm walking in dispensaries, I don't see CBN products. I don't see these other cannabinoids being discussed. Maybe now you start to see some of those conversations. I do believe it's driven from the hemp side of the industry.
Hmm.
But it's just, trying to go navigate that. So for us as a family, it was, hey, we know about cannabis, but didn't really know about all the other applications of it. And that's where kind of this beautiful journey and narrative really begun for me of just, I always like to say I'm the most curious person in the room. I'm not the smartest person in the room. I will never pretend to know all the answers, all the information, but I truly want to learn. I truly want to understand. And I think that that's really important in this industry because it's so
Hmm.
new.
Hmm. I respect that mindset, and focus on that same mindset as well. Just because one, I'm kind of a new entry into the industry. I've been a consumer and an advocate for 15 years, like you said. But there's so much to learn, right? I mean, we're just scratching the surface when it comes to these minor cannabinoids that you mentioned, and how they're helping us and whatnot. And you're right. I totally agree. I do feel it's the hemp side, the hemp industry, that's really pushing for that education, because it's just interesting to see these adult use states, say like Colorado you mentioned, and even California, where I've had guests on, and the hyper focus in some of those states, specifically California, is the potency levels of THC, right? And even the obsession with even isolating just THC isolate, as opposed to the full spectrum, which is more beneficial for your endocannabinoid system. So it's interesting to see these markets and consumer behavior based on, how they're operating, based on the kind of the roles in which they've been put in, due to legislation.
Yeah, it is really interesting. Again, I think the best thing for hopefully people listening, I always like to, of course, make sure my stories and the things I'm sharing is applicable to the person listening on the end of it. But, if you are in Texas, you should absolutely be paying attention to what California and Colorado are doing. Not that those are going to be directly impacting what happens in Texas, but to be ignorant of it is shooting yourself in the foot again, because, you know, you look at even just Delta 8, it's not legal in every state. But to your point, I have had some contacts in California where they have gone and isolated some of these THCs out, which is kind of where Delta 8 really is stemming from, as an
Mhm.
isolated THC cannabinoid. Well, maybe it's not as big as in Arkansas, but hey, in California, it's pretty big. And then, hey, that does translate into Texas. So not everything is going to directly impact you, but I think there's always something that people can be learning from these other states. And it's why I founded my podcast, and ultimately why I'm the way I am. It's just I pay attention to what's happening outside of my direct community, because it is important to understand what's going on.
There's many learnings, right? I mean, I don't think that it would be wise as the industry as a whole for us to kind of divide each other. You're the THC side, you're the hemp side. Obviously, they're different and they play within different regulations, but it's the same plant ultimately, right? And there's key learnings that we can kind of take from each of these markets and apply them in our respective states.
Yeah, and I think for like people to understand about Texas, like it's so fun, of course, like I mentioned when we kicked this off, it's great to see states like Arizona shift from medical to recreation. It's great to see states like New Mexico enact great medical programs. Oklahoma is doing amazing work. But when you look at, reflecting back home for us here in Texas, we don't have the best medical program, and obviously recreation is non-existent right now. And so I do a lot of work to kind of super plan, well, how did California roll it out? How did Colorado roll it out? Well, how is Oklahoma rolling it out? What do we think is going to happen when Texas rolls it out? Not that you can, again, in this industry, if anybody's listening who's not super involved in the industry yet, oh, just wait. It's super fun, right? But like I have customers who come to my store and they're like, oh, well, we just saw, Arizona went recreation. Does that mean Texas is going to go recreation soon? And I'm like, that's not how it works. It's
Right.
not like a light switch gets flipped and all of a sudden it's legal. In fact, I remember when Arizona went recreation with this last election, one of my good friends works for a big grow house in the area, and she was telling me that the next day they literally had regular patrons coming to their medical dispensaries being like, it's legal, right? I can shop now. Like, no, that's not how it works. It's not
Right.
that it gets passed and then all of a sudden you get to go have access to it. There's definitely processes that take place. I mean, there's just so many different levels to this, talking about vertical integration, talking about proper medical programs, that I do think consumers consumers are not privy or aware of the different nuances of the industry and how things are getting done, that it's just comical sometimes, because they come in my store and they're like, oh, can't wait for the day Texas is legal. And I'm like, but you're going to be waiting a long time because we don't have a medical program. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, they don't understand the
that
progression.
there's stages, right? It's like decriminalization, then medical program, then ultimately adult use or recreation, right? But it's phases. They don't just kind of
Yeah.
flip the switch in one go, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally get that. And so let's talk specifically about the Texas hemp market right now. So we know in a week that our Texas legislature will convene in Austin. And there's like, what, a dozen or so marijuana bills that have been filed. And while, of course, recreation seems like, unlikely to happen, at a minimum, we need some type of medical program in place, or even, decriminalization to reduce penalties for people that have you've been accused for nonviolent cannabis related crimes, right? So, like, what are your feelings of these bills? Because you're so close being in Austin, and what is your prediction for the outcome?
Oh, that's a bold question. I play a little bit of I'm a little bit of a pessimist, right? I mean, I love to see these bills getting filed. I love the excitement. Again, I have a lot of customers coming into my store and they're saying, oh, we heard all these bills are getting filed. Does that mean, blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, it is the state of Texas. And I do think that there is a process. What I envision happening is a little bit broader medical program. I have heard that there is potential movement on increasing the THC limit. So again, every state will operate differently. Texas right now does not count total THC. They just count Delta 9 THC, which is why we have the opportunity to sell Delta 8.
Right.
So I see some of that potentially getting shifted. While I do sell Delta 8 products, I am cautious that Delta 8 is not around forever. How that will get sorted, I'm not quite sure, because some people argue, well, if you just legalize everything, well, then you have access to it. I don't think that's really going to happen, especially in a state like Texas, especially with what I think is most pressing for me as a brand and a business owner who sells a lot of smokables, is seeing how this smokable ban pans out, which is not necessarily directly tied to anything happening at the legislative level. But I do think because our legislative cycle is kicking off this year, and that smokable ban is, for anybody who is kind of not aware, the quick is in August, September of 2020, the state of Texas, in an effort to further regulate smokables products in Texas. I mean, you're talking about vapes, pre-rolls, flower, but specifically pre-rolls and flower, because to an untrained eye, AKA law enforcement, your hemp looks just like weed.
And it smells the same too.
And it smells like it. And so
Yeah.
you can imagine you now have one of the largest states that has legalized industrial hemp, and one of the primary ways for them to consume it is to smoke it. It's kind of created a little bit of a problem. So while there's been some, challenging things to deal with, in the sense of they placed a ban on it. So for August to September, we could no longer sell smokables. It wasn't illegal to own in the state of Texas. So if you were a consumer who had flower on you, it wasn't illegal. It was just illegal for me to sell it to you in the state of Texas, which put a lot of strain on growers, processors, the retailers who are trying to transact and do business. But I do believe it was ultimately a good call to at least create some sort of buffer system, because for me, I don't care who shops where. Like, if you shop with me, thank you so much. If you want to shop with the guy or the gal down the street, awesome for you. All I care about is that the consumer has access to quality products and education. And unfortunately, when you are purchasing smokable flower, for example, in a gas station, that's already in an unregulated industry, it just is like, maybe not the best quality product. And again, reflecting on my retail store, what I hear time and time again, I have customers who will walk in and they'll share, hey, like this comes to mind. Hey, I just bought CBD for my dog. I don't think it was working. But I want to try your CBD. What do you have for pets? And so I walk them through. I say, okay, where did you purchase the CBD? She goes, Walmart. I go, okay, well, let's read the label. Do you have the product? Do you have it with you? She shows me the label. We do the math. I'm like, Yeah, so here's the problem. It says hemp oil, but there's no actual CBD milligrams in your product. So you kind of have this hierarchy. It's like, just because you bought it from Walmart, is that trustworthy or not trustworthy? Again, I'm not here to say, I'm just saying like consumers should do their due diligence and like research products and research brands. And then you're looking at the product label. What does the label actually say? What are the active ingredients? Then from there, it's dosing. How much of that product are you actually dosing? So in some cases with even adults, I've seen them purchase CBD from somebody. They bring the bottle, they show the bottle, I do the math, and they're like, I'm taking CBD for chronic pain. I bought this oil from some guy on a truck, on my way from here to Arkansas. Uh, why isn't it working? And I go, well, because there's 100 milligrams in the 30 mil bottle. So, you're really only getting 3 milligrams per dropper. Like, what are you doing? It's not really enough dose. And so people just they don't know how to do that for themselves. Consumers are consumers. We like to be marketed to. So again,
Right.
you just kind of have all these things that I think both brands and consumers need to be aware of as they're shopping. But yeah, I mean, kind of looping it back to Texas, I think I'm hopeful to see some change happen in the state for the better. Of course, I do think there's a lot of emphasis on our medical program. And I do believe right now, just the way that things are at a national level, you're going to need to see what you kind of highlight, that progression, right? It's not like, oh, it's all of a sudden they're going to just like slap, rec on the bill and it's going to get passed in the next couple months. And all of a sudden
Right.
we're going to have a rec market. Like, no, you kind of need to follow the signs. And so with that, I don't think there's going to be a ton that will directly impact that side of the industry, but from selling smokables, amount of THC percentages, those are things that I'm excited to see be expanded upon, because I think that
Mhm.
will empower the industry to continue to grow forward.
Oh yeah, make it much easier to operate. No doubt about it. And I got to commend you. I really love that approach that you take where, even if it's not your product that people are buying, it's that education factor because ultimately like we want the plant to be more accessible, right? To consumers regardless of what they're taking it for, whether it's for creativity, recreation, for ailments or what have you. So the fact that you're educating and kind of just showing them what to look for when shopping for products, say at Walmart or on Amazon, which I would highly recommend not doing. It's good because you're ultimately bringing those consumers back, right? Because there's a lot of detractors out there. There's a lot of people that will try a CBD product on Amazon where, that product may contain little to or even no CBD, right? And then they tell their friends, it didn't work. I'm done with that. And so I really love that you're doing that at Restart CBD. One more thing to touch on within the Texas hemp industry, and then I want to shift focus to marketing because I know that you're a marketing guru and you can share a lot of value in terms of marketing in the cannabis industry. But I want to ask industrial hemp, right? Like I had Jeff Apodaca on. He was the former gubernatorial candidate in New Mexico, and he's kind of building out a big operation in New Mexico to position New Mexico as one of the leading states for industrial hemp. And I've heard that that's the goal for Texas as well for some farmers. So what are your thoughts on the industrial hemp side as it relates to Texas and the future for that?
Oh, I'm so excited about that. I think that's a huge opportunity. Unfortunately, I think it requires a lot more processes and infrastructure to be in place. So right now you saw Texas opened up essentially licenses to grow this past year. We saw a lot of farmers getting really excited to start growing hemp. And I think they thought, again, with the smokable ban, with the knowledge of kind of like, the best way to consume cannabis with the current market, I just think a lot of farmers didn't do the full vision of the application of it and how they were going to roll it out. So we saw a lot of farmers who were growing a lot of crops that, in my opinion, were not very great for smokables, but that's what they grew it for, right? They were like, oh, I'm going to grow, we're going to sell it, people are going to want to buy it, they're going to want to smoke it. And then you have the smokable ban. It's like, oh, well, we can't technically actually buy your flower right now, so I'm going to try again. But then you talk to some of those farmers and you're like, well, why didn't you grow for paper? Why didn't you grow for textiles? Why didn't you grow for hempcrete? Those aspects of the industry require different processors. Those aspects of the industry require different infrastructures. And so It's
De-
exciting to hear
de-
that New Mexico.
decortication being one, right? The separating of the fiber and herd, like you mentioned, the processing. That's one thing
Yes.
that's not there. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're going to need big players with money to step in, which I do think it's coming, especially like you're mentioning New Mexico. I have heard that about New Mexico too. I do think Texas is go like obviously a lot of people from a cannabis perspective, they have their eye on marijuana. They have their eye on full legalization, but I think if you really look at what hemp's application is from an agricultural industrial perspective, it's the plant of 50,000 uses. You see
Mm-hmm.
big companies like Patagonia going and incorporating hemp textiles and fabrics into their clothing. It's more sustainable for the planet. You grow it and it's regenerative for the soil. It's like there's so many other applications. And as somebody who owns a quote unquote CBD brand, I'm kind of, one of those people who's like, okay, another CBD brand, another smokable brand. Like, come on, get interesting, you guys. And unfortunately, I'm not in that position to further lay into that type of stuff, but that is the exciting part for me. I would love to see more hemp paper companies, but those aspects, in my opinion, are why cannabis is really in this position in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
You look back at originally when cannabis was, I wouldn't say it was legal, but it was definitely not illegal.
It was a
Paper,
crop. It was a crop that we
cotton.
used. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about competing industries, you talk about deep pockets, you talk about, all these politics, and it just is really sad. I think as a marketer, I joked, again talking about cannabis like culture, oh, reefer madness. Like I thought that was just a funny like haha video. No, that was literal propaganda that changed people's minds back then, and that's where you started seeing these other industries really overpower hemp. And that's ultimately, in my opinion, why we're kind of finding ourselves here. So I think it's going to be a bigger undertaking, but I look forward to seeing those aspects of the industry being pushed forward, because you can only smoke so much weed. You can only, take so much CBD oil. Let's actually use this plant for its many properties that it's available for.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to give a shout out to one of my former guests, Morris Beagle, Silver Mountain Hemp Co. And he's actually developing hemp guitars, which is really cool. So to your point of like people being creative and really utilizing this plant in different ways besides just starting another CBD brand, that's one example, which I think we're going to see more and more of that as the industry matures this year and moving forward. But Shayda, so let's switch gears. Let's talk about okay. The difficulty and the challenges when it comes to marketing cannabis online, right? I know that when we first kind of talked and got to know each other over the phone, we kind of jammed on the fact that, we're both come from a digital marketing background, know that space very well. But then entering cannabis, there's a whole new set of challenges, mainly because it's one of the most highly regulated industries in the market, right? So, talk to me about your experience with brand marketing for cannabis and yeah, some best practices that you found along the way.
Yeah, I think coming from a traditional marketing background, it helped, right? I'm not going to pretend that like having a marketing background didn't obviously set me up for more success compared to somebody who doesn't have a marketing background. But I think when you're approaching cannabis, pretty much everything that you learn, like traditional marketing, gets thrown out the window because you're really not able to play. I mean, you're talking, let's say, email marketing. The major platforms, there's one that has a chimp in the name, MailChimp. MailChimp allegedly does not like CBD businesses. And so even if you, again, you're not marijuana, you're a federally legal entity or federally legal industry and you're operating, you can't be on MailChimp. Why? Because MailChimp is a closed platform. Then you extrapolate out. You talk about Facebook, Instagram. Man, I love those features. They're super sexy. When you go to Facebook, it says, do you want to link your e-commerce store so people can see products? Hell yeah, I do. You know what I can't do? That. Basically everything.
I was gonna say the same thing. I was like, they offer the like $50 advertising promo code or whatever, and I'm like, I can't even run an ad on your site. Like, what are you
Exactly.
doing? Yeah.
Exactly. So I just think if you're a brand trying to navigate the market, you have to be a little smart that these these platforms are going to market things to you to take advantage of that you cannot do or take advantage of. Now, I think in the realm of social media, you've seen a little bit more workaround. I don't want to say leniency, but I've seen workarounds where people have set up, a separate account that has nothing to do with cannabis or hemp. It's like, we're a wellness account and we like active bodies. And then it's a photo of someone applying like a topical and it's like herbal topical. And then you click it. And of course it's like a CBD topical.
Right. Hemp derived is the word. They don't use CBD on the labels, right?
Exactly. And you have to get smart about that. And so I think some things that we've, so I'll admit, like I don't really do the traditional marketing that I used to do. Like I haven't paid for advertising. I haven't, really gone and spent money in that traditional sense to build my brand. I've had to do a lot of guerrilla marketing tactics, which I think is more fun in one way, because I do think that I love a challenge, right? It's like trying to figure out like what you can get around and get away with doing, but it's also just adapting. Like this is the nature of the game. I think for anybody who sits there and is like, well, I wish that I could be on Instagram and not have my account taken down. It's like, well, tough bananas. Like that's what you're dealing with. And I think for us as a brand, I deal in a little bit different space. So yes, I have a degree in marketing. I did corporate tech marketing for many years. Specifically in platform and web. So I do come from that world. So it is a little bit more, familiar to me. But I think when you kind of contrast that against, what's going on, it's like, I always like people to listen to what I'm saying and don't try to recreate what I'm doing. You're not me.
Right.
Good luck. You're not me.
Right.
However, you're you, and you bring something really unique to the table that I do not bring to the table. So when I was working at this corporate tech company, I was there essentially like event manager. I did branding for them. I did product marketing. I traveled a lot, and I got to have a lot of meals with a lot of really great people in a lot of really fun cities, that I ultimately started an Instagram account separate from cannabis as just a food blogger, essentially. Well, that food blog started about 6 years ago. I've gotten, close to about 20,000 followers now in my account. And it wasn't a light switch overnight that I started creating cannabis content, but I slowly have transitioned that equity that I already built on social media and converted it to talk about Restart CBD. I talk about interesting stuff in the cannabis industry. But me as a brand, I call myself a brand. I'm a personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
I can make that decision to go post deprecating content that might potentially get torn down. And I do. I got a message last week from Instagram. I post myself smoking cannabis all the time. Why? Because I want to be a woman who helps destigmatize cannabis at a high level and also empower other women that smoking is not something that is just for the boys club.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most bioavailable way to experience cannabis. Why the F not is, why can't we talk about it?
And not to mention the science behind how much medicinal value there is for females when it comes to the plant, right? I mean, everything from cramps. I heard Queen Elizabeth used to do the droplets for PMS in certain situations. So there is a lot of medicinal therapeutic value for females, for sure.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of women who are shy. And I've even personally gone through it. I've had, friends, family members, ex-boyfriends who are like, you smoke too much. I'm like, what? Excuse me? Like, F off, like just kind of trying to control that conversation. But again, kind of back to the marketing point, I post that content and I've had that content removed. I've been threatened by Instagram to have my personal account taken down. Those are things that are just part of the game that I willingly take the burden on. Now, if you are not the brand and you are someone else, like you're working for someone else, you might not have that same, discrepancy.
Right.
You might not have that same tolerance. So again, pushing into Restart, you better believe I'm going to post the same content that I post on my Shayda Torabi account. Why? Because it's my brand and I can control that. And so you're always constantly trying to, it's funny. I have a cannabis lawyer and she's like, my job is not to tell you not to do something. My job is to tell you, this is the boundary, this is the parameters, and this is what I can defend you against. This is how, this is like how it looks. Now you do something with that information, right? Be smart about it. And so I think it's just good information for everyone. Again, you're not me. So maybe you don't want to go post on your Instagram, you smoking a blunt, at 7 a.m. on a Sunday, wake and bake style. But for me, I do. And I don't mind pushing that boundary with Instagram or Facebook to further educate, destigmatize, and ultimately convert people into cannabis consumers.
It's so funny because we kind of, I mean, as professional marketers, we kind of share the same kind of approach. I kind of did it different. So obviously, as I mentioned, I'm a new entry into the industry as of last year, like end of March, early April timeframe. But I've kind of did it the other a different way. So I started the Cannabinoid Connect Instagram and social media channels, and have done posting of me, some pictures and whatnot of me smoking or holding a joint or something like that. But I'm slowly baking that into my personal brand feed and whatnot. So I started with the brand that I'm operating in the cannabis space, and then now I just want, like you said, I want people to see me, my personal brand, advocating for the plant as well, because it's all about removing that stigma. I am so tired of people that have no idea or clue of the medicinal value, the economic benefits, or even the environmental benefits that you touched on, just knocking the plant and speaking the same language of the reefer madness back in the 30s, 1930s, right? Where we need to become much more educated and informed regarding this plant, because we're going to miss the boat if not, and that can't happen.
Well, I think that's where marketing really comes in, realizing, if you have a traditional marketing background, they always say marketing is the tip of the spear. It's the first thing someone engages with your brand, whether that's hitting your social media, it's listening to a podcast, it's seeing you at an event, it's, shopping your product in a store and touching it and seeing what it feels like in their hands. Those are all functions of marketing. And so for me as a marketer, I lift up to the high level and I try to see, you can't do all of it. I mean, you can if you have a team and you got a lot of money. I don't have a team. It's me and my sisters, and I don't have a lot of money. So I do a lot of things very guerrilla marketing, but you're kind of trying to look at a high level and figure out, what is my brand? I talk a lot about, if you've ever, listened to Simon Sinek, his TED Talks, start with why. You really need to understand, like, what's your why, especially in such a saturated market like cannabis, like hemp, CBD. Again, in Austin, when I launched, there was maybe one other CBD retail store in Austin. Now, when you look around, a dozen.
I can't imagine. And for people listening, I'm sure they understand. Texas, obviously very red state. Austin, much different. Very blue, more progressive in terms of, their views on cannabis and whatnot. So I can't imagine, because Dallas is pretty saturated with CBD retail shops, but I can't imagine what the landscape in Austin looks like.
Austin is very, very buzzy. Like you are, identify. We've got a lot of, cannabis kind of culture going on in the city. I mean, we are the live music capital of the world. And that is a little bit of my background, actually came from live music. So that's kind of what got me into cannabis. You go to a concert, you smoke a joint, and you listen to some music. It's a great experience.
Yeah.
So I just think brands need to be a little, strategic on their why, because that's the foundation for how you go do all these different functions. I mean, we love doing in-person events. We love being involved in our community. I mean, you touched on it, and that was definitely my point earlier. It's like anybody who I come in contact with as a brand, my job is to hopefully leave them smarter than when they met me. And whether they purchase a product or not for me, my goal is to make them the influencer. So I do a lot of influencer marketing as an influencer with an account myself. I understand the value of me being an influencer. But when you really start to flip the conversation and you realize, that mother of two is an influencer to her mom group, that, brother on the soccer team is an influence to his team members. It's how do you get these people to be advocates of the plant? Because again, ultimately, change happens, unfortunately, but fortunately, through democracy. And democracy requires voting, and voting requires knowledge of the subjects. And so if I have someone who doesn't have a good understanding of something, or they had a bad experience, or it didn't make sense to them, they're less likely going to go advocate on behalf of that plant. And so to kind of bring it around, we having a retail store have really, I think, figured out, mastered how to empower the consumer. So they come in, they know that we're going to educate them, that I literally have people coming into the store and they're like, I know nothing. I hear that you guys know a lot. teach me. And you just see like their eyes light up. They're curious. I think people are really curious. They want information. And so it breaks my heart sometimes because it does happen. I mean, specifically at a city level, I've heard of stories of someone going to another CBD shop and buying a product and not getting fully educated on it, specifically Delta 8. This came up a couple weeks ago. I had a customer come into my store first time. He goes, last night I bought CBD at another CBD store. The guy told me I was really going to like it. He sold it to me. And I think it was called Delta 8. You know, he's kind of like, I think this is what it's called. I don't know. He's like, I took it, went to a function, had to speak in front of some people. It hit me, did not like that experience. I was very concerned. But his whole point was, he's like, I liked the way it made me feel. That was the wrong environment for me to feel it in.
Right.
I wish I would have been educated properly. I probably wouldn't have eaten the edible at that moment. And maybe I would have liked it more, but he liked it enough that he did some research. He did a little Google. He found my shop. He came to see me. I gave him a good 45-minute Delta 8 conversation and everything else under the cannabis sun. And he walked away more empowered. And that's all it takes, right? I hate when people are trying to, unfortunately, it's the nature of everything. They just want to make a quick buck. They want to make a quick buck. They want to sell the consumer on something. They want to get their product into Whole Foods, Sprouts, Walmart, whatever. But I really urge brands to figure out their why. Maybe their why is to make money, but maybe there could be another avenue that it's actually helping, helping the industry instead of hurting the industry. And so that's where I think we just are sitting in a really interesting position as brands who have an opportunity to really help make these consumers advocates and influencers. And that is such a broad word. I mean, you kind of mentioned lobbying and the legislative stuff happening. I have customers who come to our shop and they're, telling me, we want legalization. We want this to change. And I go, you can help impact that. It's not just me, but like you and I kind of know, man, when I worked for a corporate tech company, just because I was consuming cannabis, I didn't want my name anywhere associated to this.
Right.
It just is such a delicate conversation, unfortunately, still, that you have to treat it with that respect as you move forward. So I don't expect people to, everybody to run out and call their lobbyists and, their politicians and their senators and kind of, why isn't this legal? But it starts with conversations, right? It starts with having conversations over social media. It starts with having conversations over the family dinner table. I had a woman yesterday, she sent me a message. She started following me. She's a mom of 2 in California. She's thinking of moving to Texas with her family for better opportunity. As we know, with COVID, everybody's kind of being more flexible and everybody's coming to Texas. They like what we got going on.
They love Texas.
But she acknowledged we don't have a full cannabis program. And she's like, I was honestly really concerned and really, just afraid of the accessibility that I would have to cannabis. And she's like, your content has just made me feel so much more comfortable about coming to Texas. You really helped me open my eyes. You helped me and my husband see. She's like, I'm a mother. I don't want to lose my kids over this plant, but you're right. Like, why can't I be a mom who likes cannabis? I'm not a mom who's, drinking a bottle of wine every night, or maybe you are. What's the difference?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So I think those are really meaningful things that as a marketer, as a brand owner, as just a cannabis advocate who just like truly loves this plant, like those are what lights me up, and being able to have those conversations is really kind of what it's all about. Is just like helping further the plant forward.
Yeah. It's that notion of owning the cannabis conversation, the first cannabis conversation, right? And just doing your best to educate so that those people in turn, like you said, become advocates. And that's the first step. We can't expect people to run and call our politicians and make this change happen overnight. It starts with education. And that's why also I love what you're doing on the podcast side, right? Anytime I can talk to a fellow podcaster, especially in the cannabis space and in Texas, Shayda, that's awesome, right? So as we kind of wrap this up, I want to hear like what your focus is for your podcast, To Be Blunt, and what you have planned in the new year, and where people can find and subscribe to that podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I share the same sentiment as you. It's just so fun to be able to have these conversations and jam. I think it's like my favorite word to use. I'm like, I just want to jam with everybody. Yeah, the podcast was started during COVID as just a side project, as an extension of my passion for cannabis and marketing, and really just trying to figure out. It was a selfish endeavor. It was like, hey, I need to have more conversations as a curious person. How do I do that? Okay, let me just ask. I think that was like, my 2020 mantra was ask. If you ask, the answer could be no, but you don't know if you don't ask. So you have to kind of put it out there. And I had just amazing conversations. I was very fortunate. I had Andrew D'Angelo on my podcast. He's legacy cannabis in California. His brother, Steve D'Angelo, very famous with the pigtail braids. Everybody's very aware of their family's impact in cannabis. They now have co-founded Last Prisoner Project, which directly advocates and helps those who are still in prison for cannabis laws, especially in states like California, where it's now legal and you have people who are locked up. It's ridiculous. So that was a really important conversation for me to have. And again, kind of looping back everything for me, he's in California and we were able to kind of riff on, he's like, oh, this is kind of what I observe about Texas. This is kind of what I think is happening. This is where the industry is trending. And for me, it gives me a good kind of gauge of where I'm at, what's happening in my state again, and then kind of what's happening at a national level. But I'm really excited for 2021 because, just more conversations. I kind of had a little last 2020, I think it was like 3 days before the new end of the year. And I was like, you know what do I want to do for 2021 with the podcast? And my dream brand that I've just been gaga over as a cannabis consumer is Leafly. I think they have been one of the leaders in educating me and a lot of others in the industry. And so that was kind of a wish list brand to get on my show. And I just secured the senior vice president of marketing.
Nice.
Thanks. So she'll be on my podcast in a couple weeks, and that episode will air probably in a month or so. But yeah, just like looking forward to having more conversations. So hopefully if you have listeners who are interested in kind of, talking about branding and marketing, that really for me was the punctuation. It's everything we discussed. The industry is so transparent. I mean, not transparent. The industry is not transparent. The industry is so isolated, especially being a brand in Texas. I remember looking around thinking, well, who do I learn from? Oh shit, it's me. I'm learning from me. And then other people are learning from me. And I'm like, I'm not the smartest one in the room, but okay, we're doing this. And so I think just that attitude has just served me so well, because it's like, I just want to learn. I just want to soak it up. And so if other people are doing cool things, like, let's talk, let's learn about it. That's really the pinnacle point of it all. But yeah, I appreciate this conversation always, because I think it's really fun to get to share and learn. And again, I would just kind of like articulate for those listening, you are not me. Don't do as I do, but listen to what I said and try to figure out how it applies to your life, right? What are your skill sets? What are the things that light you up? If it's marketing, great. If it's public speaking, great. Obviously, us doing a podcast, me being a guest on a podcast is me marketing. I do this because I like it, but I also know that I'm going to get a clip of this. I'm going to promote it and I'm going to, be exposed to more people. So
absolutely
don't do things blindly, do things strategically, but also do things that are in your wheelhouse is kind of my parting thoughts. But yeah, you can find the podcast at tobeblunt.buzzsprout.com. To Be Blunt is the name. We're on all the platforms, Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes. And I'm on Instagram with my personal account, the Shayda Torabi. I just joined Clubhouse. I'm excited to do a lot of cannabis content on Clubhouse. Been starting some discussions up. It's been really exciting. And then my brand Restart CBD, we ship nationwide. We have a brick and mortar here in Austin. If anybody is ever in Austin, Texas, we would love to see you, educate you, shake your hand in person. Or I should say maybe elbow bump now in the days of COVID.
yeah.
But yeah, just grateful to be alive and well in the heart of Texas and looking forward truly to what cannabis will be up to in 2021.
Absolutely. Very sound advice, Shayda. Really appreciate all your insights that you shared today, both, regarding what's happening currently in the Texas hemp market, as well as, branding and marketing best practices in the cannabis space. I do want to have you on again, and maybe even if you'd be open to it, like becoming like a regular guest, because you have such a pulse on the Texas market. And we'd just love to kind of have you on again as things evolve in this state. So
count me in always. I love to talk about Texas.
awesome. Well, hey, really appreciate it again. And I can't wait to run it again back with you next time. And thank you all for listening. We'll talk again. Bye.
Bye.